What do sports fans, namely college football fans, college sports fans, love to debate and complain about the most? The rankings. And that's kind of where we are now, several weeks into this college football season in particular, as we now are having some rankings that maybe matter a little bit more than what they maybe mattered in week 1 or 2 or in the preseason, inching closer to the college football rankings. And all of that mess, that will just be a debate that'll never satisfy everybody, but that's why we love it so much. I'm Mike Asti, and on this episode of Mic Drop here, made possible by the Believe Network and also available everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, TuneIn, Google Play, Spotify, etc. I am going to be bringing on somebody that I think is one of my favorite follows on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call your social media platform these days, where these debates rage on. And we are going to talk his college football rankings and how they compare to the actual college football rankings, the coaches poll, the AP poll that are out right now, and then where we go with the college football playoff rankings, because they're not the same. And this maybe does get into some math and some analytics. So those of you maybe who don't like that space, I'm so sorry, but I like it and I want to try a different show here. And I'm going to have that conversation with Kelley Ford, and Kelley Ford joins me from thelines.com. You can also find his work at kfordratings.com and at kfordratings on Twitter, X, as I now will bring Kelley on the show. So Kelley, first off, I definitely thank you for joining me. And for anybody who's not following you, you do a lot of work to get these rankings, I would imagine. It looks like you're putting a lot of work in, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, maybe more work than at least some coaches have kind of said this. Even a coach that I cover has literally dropped this bomb. West Virginia Mountaineers head coach Neil Brown actually said he spent a lot of time sending in his poll. His team didn't get ranked despite a big win. And he wants to know how much time everyone else is putting in. Doesn't feel like everyone else is putting in the same energy. Kelley Ford's putting in the same energy.
Hey, Mike, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. And yes, I agree with Coach Neil Brown. I believe West Virginia should be ranked based on my numbers. Yes, I do put quite a bit of time and energy into the power ratings. And then as a result of that, I'm able to generate the resume rankings, which is what we're talking about here tonight. But it's a lot of fun. It's a labor of love for sure. And I'm over at thelines.com now, writing some articles, doing some podcasts, as well as some other places too. So just trying to continue to grow the K Ford rating brand in the college football space. And I appreciate opportunities like this to come on with other passionate college football fans like yourself and talk a little West Virginia and talk a little rankings.
Absolutely. Yeah. We might even talk maybe some Penn State as well, as they're creeping up there. They're another team within our family of networks. But again, Kelley Ford with me, thelines.com, K Ford Ratings on social, and his website is, we're going to talk rankings. We're going to talk some power rankings. We're going to talk to how he gets what he offers and how they compare with everybody else. So you mentioned how you think West Virginia should be ranked. They didn't get ranked. But before we get fully into the Mountaineers and their gripe there, and maybe some other teams in that back half of the top 25 that I kind of think is the most interesting, because there are some debates and it almost feels like the voters are not going either direction. So I almost was kind of surprised and confused on how they put together the top 25 in the back half. But just in general, how do you come up with, you mentioned the power rankings and then to the rankings, is there a math formula involved? Is this opinion based? Because to be fair, all of this is going to have some opinion. We see preseason strength of schedules released, and then you go into a season and a lot of those teams aren't as good as they're supposed to be, or some teams better than they were supposed to be. Look at TCU last year. So how do you come up as exact, I guess, as you can describe it with your rankings? Is there a formula that you follow? Do you throw opinions in, or style points part of this at all, or is this straight math?
Yeah. So it is not opinion based, and you touched on
Okay.
so many things there, Mike, that I want to get to because
Absolutely.
you made really good points on all of that. So here's how the resume rankings are generated, and you talk about the preseason polls and how they have bias and all that. I don't do any, I call them most deserving rankings. I don't do a most deserving ranking in the preseason. You can't. What are you ranking? Nobody's played any games. Like it doesn't make any sense.
The season
Now,
before is what they're
right,
doing.
exactly. And that's
Right.
not what ranking should be. Ranking should be based on what have you achieved on the field in this given year? And so, yeah, after week 0, there were only 14 teams, quote, ranked because only 14 FBS teams played. And then after week 1, of course, everyone joins the party and your resume gets built over time. I do preseason ratings. So I do have a preseason power rating 1 through 133. And I also folded in the FCS this year as well with kind of a light model. And that is, largely based on how good was this team last year. So a team like Colorado that had so much turnover here this year, my numbers, my power ratings undervalued coming into the year. Now the model has since more than caught up to Colorado. Feels very good about where I have Colorado right now. Power rated somewhere around number 60 this week. And USC, same thing last year in 2022, amount of turnover. It makes it difficult to project those teams. But the beauty about the ranking is I'm using my power ratings as the engine for that. And what it's doing, though, if a team is much better than we expected they were going to be, you're going to get credit for that in my rankings. Because what I'm doing is I'm assigning credit to your opponent's power rating, not their ranking. I don't care that Oregon beat number 19 Colorado in the AP weeks ago.
Okay.
I care that Oregon beat the number 62 power rated Colorado team a couple weeks ago. You're getting credit for your opponent's power rating, and that's their power rating either at the time the game was played or currently. So if you played a team like Colorado, or TCU, they played Colorado in week 1 where I had Colorado power rated like number 99. And there's an actual rating assigned to that. I'm using the ranking numbers because it makes it easier to talk about. So at the time, TCU was punished for losing to a team power rated 99. Now, as the season's gone on, and we found out, hey, you know what? Colorado's actually better than that. They're power rated number 60-ish. Now TCU's lost to Colorado in week 1. Their loss is to a number 60 power rated team, not a number 99.
Okay.
So you're going to get max credit. Every single team's going to get max credit for their opponent's power rating, either at the time the game was played or currently, whichever one is better. So that's what I'm using to formulate these resumes. And then what I'm doing is basically making it so that every single schedule is viewed through the same lens. So it's not just for West Virginia, for example, it's not just, oh, how did West Virginia do against Penn State? It's how did West Virginia do against Penn State relative to what would have been expected of the average top 25 team against Penn State. So you're normalizing every team's schedule and viewing it through the lens of the average top 25 team. And then that's basically what ESPN's strength of record is, for those familiar with that. Now, strength of record doesn't do the variable power rating engine. It just takes what is the FPI at the time, and that's how it assigns credit. So I like my approach slightly better because it gives you max credit. And to generate my most deserving rankings, I also incorporate a relative scoring margin. So what is your scoring margin per game relative to what would be expected of the average top 25 team against your schedule? I mash then what's your record relative to expected? What's your scoring margin relative to expected? You mash those two things together. They're not equal weights, but it's a weighted combination. That's how you get the most deserving rankings that come out. That is how I rank teams. I'm using the Kelley Ford power ratings as the engine and then normalizing the schedule and the results relative to what would be expected of the average top 25 team against that schedule.
Okay. Again, Kelley Ford joining me here from kfordratings.com and at kfordratings on social. You did mention, though, you start with ratings, then you go into rankings, and the annoyance that we both feel of how teams get ranked off of the previous season. How do you get, though, before games are played or even after only 1 week or so of games being played? Because a lot of times, even after week 0, even in week 1, you get a lot of mega upsets. Like nobody had Clemson losing, and we've seen them been exposed a little bit, but almost everybody would have had them a lot better than probably where they are now, just off of recruiting, because we cover recruiting. A lot of college outlets and college media cover recruiting heavily. So maybe that's one way to build a team. But if you're not basing it off of last year's record at all, like you're not automatically giving a mulligan and saying Georgia's the de facto champ until someone beats them again, then how are you figuring out the ratings? Like, how did you get Colorado at 99 and move them to 60? Because the reason why I bring that up, this is one of the weird years. And we talk a lot of gambling as well on this show and throughout our coverage too. And I don't know if you follow that much of that, but if you've noticed, Vegas is usually right on the money. They have been off the money most of this season. Like they had Colorado as a 20-point dog. They beat TCU. I don't think they've been correct on more than one game of West Virginia's, besides maybe the FCS game. Like they have actually been missing a lot. And it's very weird and funky. You almost can't go by Vegas odds right now this year. So Vegas has been wrong. Last year is not figured. How then are you getting there early in the season?
Yeah, so early in the year, in the preseason, what I'm looking at is three main things. I'm looking at your returning production. So who is coming back from your team last year and how much production do they represent? And of course, not all production is equal. A quarterback production is different than a lineman production is different than a tight end production, right? But that's what you're looking at first and foremost. That's the biggest weight in the preseason component. And I am capturing transfers in that component. Some people capture transfers in their recruiting rankings. I don't think it's right or wrong. I've chosen to do it with returning production, and also you're scaling things because a player who's transferring into West Virginia from Marshall, I'm going to downgrade their production because I'm not expecting them to be as productive at West Virginia as they were at Marshall. Whereas if a player is transferring from Penn State to Miami of Ohio, I'm going to upgrade their production because I'm expecting them to be more productive at Miami than they were at Penn State.
Did that maybe ding Colorado going into the season? Because like Shedeur Sanders, for example, he's had a great year so far. He's a leader of that team. They're probably very likely at least a bowl team plus. But he was coming from an FCS despite being great there. So you probably going in the year, we're not going to you couldn't give him a great quarterback number until you see it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right, Mike. And I mean, another team that, I was too low on coming into the year is like a Texas State, another team that had a lot of turnover. Anytime you have a team that has that much turnover, either within the roster or on the coaching staff or both,
we're talking like 86 players for Colorado. Like it's impossible.
Yeah. Right? You're almost just thinking, okay, here are these two extreme outcomes it could be for Colorado. I'm going to try to thread the needle and get somewhere in the middle. And then once we get going with in-season data and that preseason component gets phased out, now we really have an idea of what Colorado is. And we have seen that now. But returning production is the main component. Then you're also looking at your recent recruiting. So how well have you recruited to replace the talent that you've lost, whether that's to the NFL draft, to graduation, or to the transfer portal? And then the final piece is what's your recent K Ford rating? So I have, power ratings for every single team that's played college football at the highest level, going all the way back to the beginning of college football now. It's a project I did a couple summers ago.
Wow. I'd love to see that, and that'd be another show for another day, but wow.
That is a great show. If you have time and you want to do it maybe in the spring or in the summer, we can dive into all that. It's too much to talk about during the year to get to that, I know. But
we definitely will. Actually, remind me if I forget, because I don't know if you've seen this kind of debate that raged on a lot during the offseason in the college football media space. A lot of people, and I was part of it, were maybe nerding out and digging into what Wikipedia has going on and saying, this team shouldn't have this claim to a national title, or this team should also have this claim to a national title, because pre-1970, you could argue nobody's the champion. Like there's 6 claims, and teams that are undefeated are not getting claims, but other teams like Pitt, for example, has 9 total titles they claim, when 8 of them really we don't know, and they didn't claim them until 3 days or 3 decades after the games were played. That's a whole nother debate we can talk about on another show. But admittedly, I can get down that Wikipedia wormhole because I'm not sure how they're figuring half of what they have. It's different than the NCAA a lot of the time. And that's where the common fan goes to Wikipedia. So it sucks to say, but like that's where they're getting these claims from.
I would love to do that with you. I am down on a future episode to do that for sure, because my numbers definitely tell a story, and it's not going to be the Wikipedia story, that's for sure.
I figured, yes.
But in terms of the final component, it is the recent recruiting. So, of course, we're not going back to the beginning of college football, but we're looking over the course of the last 3-4 years. Your recent K Ford rating. You're not going back to the beginning of college football, but the last 3-4 years, what has your K Ford rating been? Because what we've seen is it's not every single year. It's not 100%. But typically, teams that have been good recently continue to be good, and teams that have been poor recently continue to be poor. Of course, there's peaks and valleys, and teams trend up and trend down over time, but that's a very predictive component of it. So then once we get going in the season, the preseason weight gets phased out slowly but surely over the course of the year, and it gets replaced with the more informative in-season data. To answer your question, though, Kelley, after week 1, you get some big upsets. And what does it look like in your rankings if you're not using any preseason priors and all that? Well, I'll give you what my top 10 was after week 1 in the most deserving rankings. I had Florida State number 1. Of course, they had a neutral site win over LSU. That's really good. I had Duke number 2.
I was going to say you'd have to put Duke up there then.
They beat Clemson, who I had power rated, I think, number 7 or number 8 at the time. Colorado was number 3 because they got a road win at TCU, who my numbers thought was a top 20 team coming into the year. Here's one for you. One that AP voters would never do. Number 4 in the K Ford most deserving after week 1, Texas State. because they beat Baylor on the road. That was one of the best wins. Now, Baylor we've seen has not been as good as we thought, but at the
and they
time,
were kind of so last year. I could maybe push back on that one because they weren't that great last year, and then this year we're seeing it's almost like they get exposed every year.
Let me see. Let me just check really quickly where I had Baylor in the preseason power rated. I had them power rated number 28 in the preseason.
I think that's high, but okay.
So it's and again, if it's high and I was too high on them, I mean, clearly, yeah. Now I have them power rated number 75. Right. So yeah, I was too high on Baylor. And again, that win for Texas State has not gotten any better because Baylor's power rating has decreased. However, it hasn't gotten any worse either. So because, like I said, you get the max credit for the time of the game or current. So that's probably the biggest flaw that someone can point to is they say, okay, well, you're going to give them credit if a team was better than you thought, but you're not going to punish them if the opponent was worse than you thought. And yeah, I know I'm not. I'm banking on the model being right more than it's wrong. And I don't like retroactively changing the significance of a win. At that time, that win for Texas State at Baylor, that was huge. Everyone, that was kind of the buzz around college football. Like, holy cow, Baylor just got upset. They might not be very good, or Texas State's just much better with all these new players and all that. So anyway, that I understand the criticism there. I'll take it. I have
a similar one is another Big 12 team that going to a West Virginia win that they're trying to claim as a big one, but I don't think the AP voters think is one with Texas Tech. They were preseason Big 12 media poll number 4. West Virginia got that win, but early in the season, Texas Tech losing to Wyoming. So like that, maybe some would have thought kind of exposed them, kind of similar boat as Baylor. But it is interesting how you don't take the weight away if a team gets exposed, because as we know, the college football playoff for sure does. Like they will flip a team in a blink of an eye if somebody no longer looks to be a quality win.
Well, what the playoff committee does that drives me nuts is they talk about ranked wins. What's your record versus top 25 teams?
Right, they 100%. And that got TCU in last year, actually, because they had 5 ranked wins. Right, 100%.
Well, I'm not okay. Yeah, I won't disagree that they had, quote, 5 ranked wins by the committee, and that's things they're looking at. My numbers did suggest TCU deserved to be in as well. Okay. I had them number 3 in the most deserving, and I'm not looking at ranked wins or record versus top 25. Sure.
I think that was what they were looking at, though, to be fair. Right, but even if they got there anyway, yeah.
Right. But because, again, we're not the best practice here is to use your opponent's power rating, not their ranking. But if I'm looking, just to go back to Texas Tech for a second, the difference between Texas Tech and Baylor is Texas Tech, from a power rating standpoint, is still a good team. I know they have 3 losses. From a power rating standpoint, they're number 32 in the power ratings. That's the best 3-loss team in the country by my numbers. So West Virginia is still getting credit for beating what's a pretty good Texas Tech team, even though the record doesn't show that. Baylor is not a very good team. Like I said, they're down in the 70s now in the power rating. So there's just a slight difference.
That makes sense then. Okay.
I'll wrap it up on the top 5 after the top 10 after week 1, because there's some other fun names in there. It was Utah was at 5, North Carolina at 6. How about Wyoming? Again, they beat Texas Tech. They were number 7. Fresno State had a road win at Purdue. They were number 8. Washington was number 9. Ohio State was number 10. That's after week 1. Now, though, that we've, some teams have played half their schedule already. I mean, Notre Dame's played 6 games at this point as well as
some other teams. Yeah.
It's crazy that we're halfway through the year. Now the top 10 in the most deserving rankings look something like this: Texas, Florida State, Ohio State, Penn State, Washington, Ole Miss. How about that? 1 loss, Ole Miss, number 6. Oklahoma, Washington State, North Carolina, Georgia. There are the Bulldogs up to number 10. They were number 18 last week. They beat Auburn this week. Now they go to number 10. So that's what the top 10 looks like now. What we'll see, and I say this openly, the most deserving rankings become more informative the later we get in the year. Because at the beginning of the year, after 1 week, if you've played 1 game, that's 100% of your resume. Whereas after 2 games, now each game is 50% of your resume. After 3 games, each game's 1/3. After 4, it's 25%. And it just keeps going down. So as more games are played, as that full body of work comes into focus, you get what you would consider, quote, more traditional rankings. And I'm not doing this. It's not designed to be traditional. It's designed to evaluate what have you done against your schedule relative to what would be expected of the average top 25 team to this point. Some teams' schedules are backloaded. I mean, you look at USC, you look at, Missouri is another team that people are saying, why aren't they ranked higher? Or Kentucky. I have Missouri 13, Kentucky 23. Well, their schedules are backloaded. If they continue to win against the competition they're going to be facing, they're going to skyrocket up these things. Texas has already beaten Alabama. Florida State's already beaten LSU and Clemson. Ohio State has a win over Notre Dame. Like some of these teams, you've already got marquee wins, and that's built in. And every single week, that marquee win is going to become less and less valuable from the standpoint of what percentage of your resume is it, and other teams are going to get credit for their wins. So it all works itself out by the end. But I think it's helpful to have these snapshots week after week to truly evaluate What have you accomplished on the field to this point relative to what would be expected? I'm sorry, Georgia. I know you're the two-time defending national champions.
Right.
I know you haven't lost a game. Your resume to this point does not
This year.
deserve this year.
Right.
Yeah, your resume to this point in 2023
Yeah.
does not deserve to be ranked number 1. In my opinion, it deserves to be ranked number 10.
Kelley Ford of KFordRatings.com joining me here on Mic Drop on Believe and Apple Podcast, TuneIn, Google Play, Spotify, etc. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can get Mic Drop, and you can listen to us talk about these college football ratings and rankings and what Kelley thinks actually should be the case, even though that differs from the AP Coaches Poll and likely the playoff as well. Although interesting for anybody tuning in, and I mean, this also is interesting, probably even for you, when honestly your mentality is very different than what they're coming up with, and a lot of it is off of history and ratings and who has ranked wins, but you might disagree that team even should have been ranked or where they were ranked. Yet at the end of the day, you analytically got TCU in the playoff, and them looking at just ranked wins really, because that was a TCU team that didn't win the conference, and then obviously that was kind of a tough pill to swallow for some. They don't win the conference. They slide in anyway because they're undefeated before that, and then they end up winning a game and become the national runner-up. But a great year for them, and they get in also. So I'd imagine, just quickly, was that something that you thought, like, going in when you were doing it? Were you thinking, like, they're going to screw TCU because they didn't win this Big 12 title, even though Kansas State's really good? And then were you at all surprised that they got in anyway? Because they're doing it differently than you.
No, I didn't. I wasn't surprised that the committee put TCU in still. I thought they would either way. The committee, I'll just say this too. For as much as I, kind of pound my fist at the committee for even mentioning ranked wins and record versus top 25, like, guys, that shouldn't even be part of the vocabulary. It shouldn't be part of the discussion at all. Like, just it's
and it is really in that lexicon.
No, 100%. And it is
100%.
fun. It is a fundamentally
probably.
It's a fundamentally flawed approach. We need to get rid of that from our vocabulary because it's not accurate. It's not right. But the committee, to their credit, every single year that I've been doing the most deserving ranking, so for the last 5-6 years now at this point, my top 4 has matched the committee's top 4, not just in terms of teams, in terms of order too. And so the committee's always gotten right. Now we start to see variation starting at number 5. So as we almost every year. So as we go into the 12-team playoff,
I was going to say now it's going to get wild. Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see how my most deserving stacks up with the committees. I'm sure we're going to see discrepancies once you get beyond 4 and into 12. But here's the team I thought was going to get screwed last year, and I'm glad they didn't because they deserve to be in. It was Ohio State. If USC would have beat Utah in the Pac-12 championship game, the committee would have kept them in the play. They were number 4 going into the game. The committee would have put them in the playoff. My numbers at the time of that game suggested USC. I believe they should have been most deserving, ranked number 7 or number 8. I can't remember exactly where I had them. It was either 7 or 8 going into that game.
Pac-12 was really down, but they would have 100% got in if they won.
They would have, and that would have screwed Ohio State over, who also didn't win their conference, didn't even play for their conference championship. But the resume that Ohio State put together at 11-1 was still the 4th most deserving resume that was out there. And since we had a 14 playoff and there's no qualifiers about anything, those are the 4 that should have gone in. Now USC loses that game. The committee dropped them. I can't remember where the committee dropped them to in their final rankings, like all the way to number 10 or something, which at that point, my numbers actually had USC number 9. I think I dropped USC 1 or 2 in the most deserving for using the Utah. And the committee had dropped them all the way to 10, I think, after losing from 4. So you're telling me, wait, they lost 1 game here at a neutral site, and you dropped them from number 4 to number 10? Like in a quote,
I think
bonus,
part
in
of
a quote,
that
bonus game.
I think part of that is I've said this for years. I think Utah is one of the most underrated programs the last 20 years. I don't think, like, I at the time I feel like the committee thought that was more of an upset than maybe it really was. And Utah, they did lose the Rose Bowl, but so maybe they validated it. But I think maybe their head was definitely in the boat of USC wins and they're in. That was basically a play-in situation. Yep. And I also could probably talk to you for hours on this topic, but I'd imagine that I would guess you probably like major conferences scrapping the division format, because we're seeing a lot around college football. Big 12 was kind of progressive into it. They kind of were forced into it, where if you recall, they had that like funky where, one true champion, but nobody really was a champion with the TCU Baylor mess of years ago.
2014.
But, right. But that forced them into and then the amount of teams forced them into just going 1 versus 2. And it's not nothing's ever in college sports. I'd imagine you would agree that nothing's ever going to be 100% fair, because unlike the NFL, you can't have 100+ teams. Not everyone's going to play everybody. Like, it's never going to be 100% fair. But scrapping divisions, to me at least, helps that case a little bit, because like you mentioned with Ohio State, they weren't a conference champ. You're dealing like Penn State, for example, last year. they weren't in the Big Ten title game, but yet end up winning the Rose Bowl. Purdue gets in there. If you don't have divisions, Purdue wouldn't have been in there. They're able to jump in because of the division format. So I'd imagine you like getting rid of divisions, or no.
For the purposes of college football, yes, I do. I think divisions make sense in a lot of other sports that we have in college athletics, and I actually work in college athletics. That's what my day job is. I work at a conference office, so I'm intimately familiar with the scheduling of intercollegiate.
It's probably needed, honestly. Yeah, it's not right.
It is needed in other sports for the purposes of football, and especially FBS football. Yeah, the divisional structure, it doesn't make sense. And I'm glad that conferences are moving away from it. I do think it's going to help produce, your more quality and your more deserving teams at the end of the year playing for those conference championship games. It will never go away. I understand there's too much money involved. There's prestige of it. But as we're looking at expanding the playoff, and now you're talking about, the number of games that these student athletes are playing and wear and tear, and is it good for their well-being and all this? If you want to get rid of games, they're talking about, well, maybe we get rid of a regular season. Get rid of the conference championship game. Like, get rid of the conference championship game.
That's just money. That's all that's about.
I understand. In 1992, when the SEC did it, it started this thing, and it's never going away. But if we want it, because and what the committee also does, which drives me nuts, is they're assigning extra credit for winning a conference championship. When, from a math perspective, I would ask why. Like it's
right.
So like right now, this
certainly
weekend,
not fair when you factor in Notre Dame, who doesn't play that, and a lot of times they get bumped despite, generally speaking, a harder schedule. And not to be like a Notre Dame lawyer here, but they want to be independent. They're going to stay independent even with this new landscape. They're looking to stay independent, but it does put them at a little bit of a disadvantage, separate from the fact they aren't even going to get a bye. Like that whole thing probably, I'd imagine, annoys you that you're automatically penalizing a team before you even get to the jump of it.
Well, the Notre Dame situation aside, and the AQ top 4 buys aside, because I think that might be changing anay with the new Power 5, Power 4, Power 3 structure, whatever it is. That could all be changing anyway by the time it gets here. But Notre Dame aside, this is a perfect example this weekend. We have the Red River Shootout. It's Texas and Oklahoma. They're playing in Dallas in the Cotton Bowl. It's a neutral site game. From a power rating standpoint, a difficulty to win this game standpoint, there's no home field advantage. These two teams, they're going against each other, and I have Oklahoma actually slightly power rated better than Texas, which I know sounds weird, but that's where it is right now. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Texas won the game, but Oklahoma is slightly better from a power rating standpoint. Right now, they're playing each other on a neutral field. If those two teams were to meet again, and that's why it's such a good example, because they do it once in the regular season.
Yeah, and they could, right.
If those two teams meet again in the Big 12 championship game, which right now they're the odds-on favorites to do that, and the other team wins. So let's say Texas wins on a last-second field goal here in the Cotton Bowl. And then let's say in December in Arlington at AT&T Stadium, if Oklahoma wins on a last-second field goal, the difficulty to achieve those two things, assuming comparable power ratings from at the time right now to at the end of the year, which let's make an assumption that it's the same. The difficulty is the exact same from a mathematical standpoint.
But
the committee is going to reward Oklahoma more for 100%. Winning in the Big 12 championship game. If I'm Texas, I'm thinking, wait a minute, we already won this game. Why now do they get extra credit because they beat us in a rematch? Because there happened to be a trophy.
That's what it is. It's a rematch. Now, I guess, but going back to you saying that you've at the end of the day you end up with the same Final Four and same playoff. We've seen repeatedly, most in particular the SEC with Bama and that whole Georgia and those teams getting involved. There have been years where Bama didn't end up winning or had a loss coming in, and then they would win it and they would get him in, or they didn't win it because Georgia's in the midst of his dynasty, and they still got in because they were respecting what they did prior in those games. So when things like that occur, I'd imagine that actually maybe is something that you're kind of pleased with. That, okay, it almost seems like that while the championship game is weighted very highly because of money, and it's also the last thing people see. So I think the problem with college football fans, not to get on my soapbox here, and how this is all debated, generally speaking, and even how the committee does this, which I also think is wrong, they legitimately put more stock into what you do more recently. So like when they're getting together to do this at the end of championship weekend, at the end of the regular season, what you did championship weekend and those couple last final weeks of the regular season matter a lot more to them than week 1 or 2. Like there was years, bringing up Ohio State again, years ago, they had a real bad loss earlier in the year to Virginia Tech, who ended up being a real bad team. It didn't affect them at all because they just stomped the rest of the season. Whereas there were other teams that felt like they had a gripe and they should have got in, but their only blemish was at the end of the year. but the committee just remembers the end of the year more. So that recency bias, I think, definitely exists and has absolutely affected these rankings and even potentially the playoffs. Certainly the debates amongst fans. That recency bias is a thing in college sports more than anything else.
It's definitely a thing, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. What my question is why? Why is the week 1 game not as valuable to the 2023 resume? Because that's what we're doing. We're evaluating. We're trying to crown a champion for 2023, the season. Well, the season started in August. Why is the week 1 game valued differently than the week 14 game in the conference championship? Like, to me, those are each, assuming a conference championship game, that's 13 games. Those are each 1/13 of your schedule. And yes, your opportunity to gain credit is likely to be more in the conference championship game because you're likely playing a more difficult opponent. But in terms of how much it makes up your resume, I am not a proponent of saying, oh, well, they're just cruising their last 4 weeks of the season, the last 6 weeks of the season.
Right.
Great. Good for them. That's awesome.
But they shouldn't have messed up 3 weeks earlier.
We're crowning a champion for 2023. I'm not crowning a champion for November and December. So to me, that's the math argument that comes in. And again, the committee's gotten it right every single time by my numbers to this point, since I've been doing it. But how we get there are 2 different ways, potentially, as you pointed out. And I guess as long as we end up at the same place, I'm okay. But the process by which they are going through this is not ideal, in my opinion. And I've had this conversation with many people in the analytics community or just on X in general over the years. The process is flawed. And because of that, even though we haven't had an outcome that's been flawed yet, if the process is flawed, sooner or later we will. And it'll be too late because we've had opportunities to change the process and we haven't done it. And so eventually it's going to bite us. It hasn't yet, and it will when we get to the 12 team for sure. But I would just like to see the whole process reevaluated and us really ask the questions. Why are we doing these things? Why are we placing so much value on a conference championship game? Why are we placing so much value on your record in November? Why are we doing this, that, and the other when we're trying to crown a champion for 2023, the whole year, which, by the way, started in August?
Yeah, 100%. It absolutely did. And yeah, we're not crowning champions for November and December. It is for the whole season. I guess the only pushback I can give you to that debate, and I kind of agree though with you, is they would probably say that maybe getting the win at the end of the year is harder because the opponent maybe is better. Like, for example, Ohio State, they had that bad loss early in the year, that particular year, but then they ended up winning the national title. So doesn't that prove they got better and they would have been a harder opponent to beat at the end of the year?
No, for sure. And you're getting, I'm not saying that the credit you earn in week 1 is equal to the credit that you earn in week 12 or week 13. I'm saying that the percentage of your resume that each of those games holds
it's still
is
about
the
a
same.
resume.
That doesn't mean though that, Ohio State, you beat Michigan in week 13, whereas let's say, for example, you beat Virginia Tech in week 2. I know they lost, or week 1 or 2, you lost that game. You're going to get more credit for beating Michigan, but that's not because of when the game was played. That's because Michigan's a better team. If you flip those and played Michigan in week 1 and Virginia Tech in week 13, you're still going to get more credit for the Michigan game, even though it was in week 1, because that's a better team. Like last year, Ohio State beat Notre Dame in week 1, I think it was, at home. Well, that game carried significant weight for the committee into the selection. And
it may again this year, because if they don't win the Big Ten this year, they're going to knock on the door and say, we got to, as you probably get annoyed by hearing this term, but they're going to say we got a quality win earlier in the year against Notre Dame that's out of conference, which maybe is better than the terminology of a ranked win.
But, I was going to say quality win. I'm all for quality win.
Okay, so you hear quality win. This probably is kind of funny to me.
Well, they use it.
Quality win.
Yeah.
It almost feels like, to me, maybe the analytic community has been able to influence more and get it to be more correct in college basketball than football, maybe, just quickly, because, for example, quality win is something that you hear a lot in college basketball. You hear a lot of quadrant win and quality win, where it's really they're just trying to rank teams separate from the actual rankings on how quality the win is. But in college football, you definitely hear the terminology of ranked win a lot more than quality win. But quality win, I guess, it would be a quality win to beat Notre Dame at that point. So that was what they're going to bring up. And then conversely, they're going to, Penn State, besides the West Virginia game out of conference, it's pretty much Cupcake City. So if those two teams are not Big Ten champs and you're talking about who slides in at 4, maybe, that probably will be Ohio State's argument. That'll be what fans will yell, is that the Notre Dame win is better than, say, the West Virginia win.
Right. Yeah. Just to reiterate the quality versus rank, I'm all for quality if you're defining quality as your opponent's power rating. If you're saying, well, a
Right.
quality win is a ranked win, like, no, those aren't interchangeable
People
things
probably
to
do.
me. Right.
Yeah,
And they
that's
do use
true.
them interchangeably, I think, which
Right.
that's not, I believe, correct. But yeah, quality win.
Right.
If you were using, how do you define quality? Is it your opponent's power rating? Great. If it's your opponent's ranking, not so good. But yeah, but yes,
Right.
I agree with you. And again, right now on the resume though, and we talk about, what's Ohio State's resume to date, what's Penn State's resume to date. I have Ohio State most deserving number 3. I have Penn State most deserving number 4. So even though Ohio State has that win against Notre Dame on their schedule already, like in the bank, you look at
Yeah.
Penn State's, their best win to date so far is the game against Iowa, and
Yeah, I would say
you can
Iowa.
debate
Yeah.
you can debate how good how good you think Iowa is. But that's their
Yeah.
best game to date so far, and yeah, there they are, which is right behind Ohio State. As it all shakes out, and again, that's because for Penn State, as I look at their relative scoring margin, they're number 2 in the country in that. They're not just beating the teams they're playing;
Right.
they're handling them. Penn State has a relative scoring margin of 15.1. That means they are outscoring their opponents by 15.1 points per game more than would be expected of the average top 25 team against the Nittany Lions schedule. Again, that's number 2 in the country behind only Oklahoma at this point. So
Yeah.
that's a big reason why Penn State's number 4 right now in the
And
most
Iowa
deserving.
was ranked at the time of that game too. So they were their opponent at the time was thought of to be a good team, whether it be by you or whether it be by the Associated Press and coaches polls, etc. Now, again, we could debate Iowa all day, but yeah, that makes some sense. Kelley Ford here joining me again of kfordratings.com and at kfordratings on social, and also thelines.com, making this interview possible. I guess I then want to pivot, and before I get fully into that back half of the top 25 and kind of debating West Virginia not getting in and maybe if they should fit in, I want to ask you your thoughts on, because this is another debate. And Neil Brown is actually, I don't know if you saw this earlier in the year, he's been a big part of this debate. His exact quote earlier in the year about West Virginia's schedule in recent years is, "That's dumb scheduling." Like, he is throwing past ADs under the bus, upset about the schedule. He's not saying it as much now, sitting there 4-1, and if it helps him later on, he might like it. But he has been upset. 3 straight years on the road, 11 Power Fives or Power Four, whatever it's going to be, comparison to everybody else that usually plays 10, some even play 9. He's upset about it. He and sometimes they're 2 on the road in those out of conference. He's been upset. He's been vocal in it. But if we're doing a ranking off of your power ranking and now into a ranking off of just the 2023 season. So we're not dealing with history or what people claim and what went on in the past. We're doing this individual season, trying to have this August starting point. For you, in your opinion, are teams like, would you like to see more of the West Virginia, I guess, because not so much in terms of what should happen in terms of the teams following the college football playoff rankings, they're probably better off just doing Cupcake City like Georgia and just rolling and collecting wins. But for you, would you rather see the West Virginia schedule? Like, does a West Virginia-like schedule where they're actually playing legitimate out-of-conference teams and it's only the one FCS outside of that? Or do you understand maybe why Georgia and Michigan go in their directions? Like, I imagine that Georgia, that is why you're dinging Georgia. Like, I imagine that strength of schedule argument, that Georgia out of conference puts nothing on the board. Neither does Michigan. They don't put anything on the board. Harbaugh's suspension was against all Cupcake City. I'd imagine that has to ding them a little bit. And I'd imagine that part of getting West Virginia in that top 25 for you is that you're giving them quality wins. I'd imagine at least over Texas Tech and TCU. And they, at the time, would argue Pitt, even though Pitt's been exposed. But most of the country is not playing a schedule as difficult as West Virginia, or even Pitt, for that matter. They play a lot, like Notre Dame, Cincinnati. They played a lot of Power 5 competition. Penn State, to bring up again in our network, they had West Virginia, but then it's UMass and Delaware. Like, those are guarantee victories. There's 2 different styles of schedules that are clearly out there on what teams are intentionally putting on the board. Maryland, for example, they've been vocal. They are intentionally trying to basically collect wins. And I think they put it, I think Lockley said, like, we wanted to set ourselves up for a favorable schedule. Basically, translation is we wanted to guarantee some victories earlier in the year before we get into this Big Ten gauntlet. And they're calling their rival Virginia, who is very rarely ever good. And besides that, it's mostly a group of 5 or an FCS team the last several years, and this year and next year. So what are your thoughts on the debate of how teams formulate schedules, how you'd like to see them formulate schedules, and how much you factor in strength of schedule when you're trying to do this.
Yeah, it's a loaded question, Mike,
It is
because
100%. I'm hoping you can
yeah.
answer it better than me.
No, no, you're good. The scheduling dynamics of college football are interesting because you have so many different,
Because isn't that the problem? Why people they're more satisfied with the NFL Super Bowl champion than the college football national champion, and you have like UCF claimed a title where they weren't in the playoff. That exists in college football because the schedules are just so freaking different. It's hard to evaluate a team playing in the SEC where you automatically get all these quality wins or even rank wins for the committee versus a group of 5, for example, like UCF that year in 2017, off of just the rankings. And I know you hate the term ranked win. They only had, I believe, 1 game against the top 15. They only had like 2 wins because they played Memphis twice. You mentioned that championship argument again. They were top 25 ranked. They beat Auburn, but like that was in the bowl game. So to get there, their resume, I don't know if that really deserved to even be there versus Alabama, who they claim the title over, who actually won the playoff title and had all these ranked wins versus the SEC or even quality wins, you could argue. They're just 2 schedule dynamics that are totally different. Like, how do you even debate it fairly?
Yeah, it is difficult. I don't disagree with that, but it's attainable. I mean, this is literally what my most deserving
Right.
rankings are for. Like, it's to
Okay.
normalize schedules. And so you talked about, SEC schedules. LSU, they're 3-2. They're right now most deserving, number 27 for me. That's 1 spot behind 5-0 James Madison out of the Sun Belt. So right now I have James Madison most deserving 26. I have LSU 27. One's 5-0, one's 3-2. You talked about Maryland earlier. Maryland is 5-0. They're number 24 in my most deserving. That's a Power 5 team that's 5-0. But again, the schedule's been what the schedule is, and they've beaten them. They haven't looked great doing it in terms of relative scoring margin, but they are now number 24. You put that with West Virginia, who approach the schedule very differently. They're 4-1, so they have a loss on it, but I have West Virginia number 15. So 9 spots higher than an undefeated Maryland. So here, to boil down your question, the dynamics that I was getting at aren't even related to this conversation, but you've got things. One, games get scheduled a decade out. Like
100%.
That needs to stop. Like, we proved during COVID in all sports that you can schedule a game on 4 days notice. And so that's not ideal, but you can do it. We need to stop scheduling a decade out. We need to schedule a year, 2, 3 tops, because rosters now with the transfer portal, NIL, all the different things that are out there to entice student athletes to go to one place or another, rosters change faster than they've ever changed before. When you schedule a team, even right now in 2023, if you schedule a team for 2026, they could look totally different. I mean, imagine if you would have scheduled Colorado 18 months ago.
I was going to bring up Colorado. TCU had no idea what they were getting into when Deion Sanders comes, 80 new players. Like last year, that was a 1-11 team.
18 months ago, you scheduled Colorado for 2023. You think it's a guaranteed win. Now, you're still looking likely to get a win based on my power ratings, but it's not a guarantee anymore. Now it's a much more competitive game. So anyway, that's one piece. The other piece here is you've got FCS programs who are building their entire budgets on buy games. And so, they're going to go try to get bought by Georgia. They're going to try to get bought by Penn State. They're going to try to get bought by West Virginia. Do I love to see that from a informative power rating standpoint at the FBS level? No, but I understand why it needs to be that way to support football, and not just football, to support athletic departments at lower levels of college athletics, not at the Power 5, not at the FBS. The conference office that I work at, it's the Horizon League. We are not a football playing conference. We're not an FCS conference. Men's and women's basketball are the 2 most high profile sports in our league. So we don't even deal with that football stuff. We have a couple members who do play football, and they are very dependent on their football revenue. And a lot of that revenue is driven by the buy games that they play against those teams. So there's that piece. But with regard to answering your question, philosophically, what would I rather see? From a rating standpoint, it helps me if we get more non-conference games, because the more interconnected data points that we get to connect the conferences together. Once you get into conference play, everything's very siloed. And basically it is what it is. And now you're going to have a very good kind of ordinal rank of the teams within the conference. But how are you stacking up the SEC to the ACC, to the Big 10, to the Big 12, to the MAC, to the Sun Belt? You only get a good feel for how to do that through the non-conference play and the games that you have to connect these teams in this large web of data. So to get a better interconnectivity, you want more non-conference games. To answer your question, though, from a different standpoint of, Kelley, which one do you prefer? Like, to me, it doesn't really matter. I want to see you play your rivals. One, like that to me, that's first and foremost. I wish conferences stay geographic. That's out the window. So at least,
and that's part of West Virginia's issue. The previous AD was thinking of. They're in a conference where they don't have rivals. They used to have rivals. They wanted to get the rivals back on the schedule, but in turn, they got themselves into what Neil Brown calls dumb scheduling in comparison to everybody else who wasn't worrying about doing it. That's how we kind of got here for West Virginia over the last 15 years. To summarize
right? No, totally. So I like that West Virginia's done that, getting Penn State, getting Pitt on the schedules here. But to me, I say it doesn't matter, and here's why. I outlined to you where I have West Virginia at number 15 despite a loss, where I have Maryland 5-0 at number 24, LSU with 2 losses at 27, ahead of Iowa and Oregon State, who have 1 loss each from Power 5 conferences. Like, it doesn't matter to me because I am normalizing your schedule anyway. Now, it probably does well, it 100% matters to the AP poll voters. We've seen that. West Virginia, you have a loss, and Louisville, you do not. Louisville, you are ranked. 100%. West Virginia, you are not ranked because you have a loss and Louisville does not. Well, okay, that's one way to go about it. That's not how I go about ranking, but no one asked me, and I'm not an AP poll voter, so that's how that goes. But in terms of how I'm viewing everybody's schedule, it's through that common lens. That's why I hit on it so hard early in this session, because it's so important. It doesn't matter who you play. It matters how you play in those games and by how much you win or lose those games. That's how I'm going to build and grade your resume. So yeah, to the AP poll voters, to the committee, we haven't seen a team with 2 losses get into the playoff. We haven't deserved to, but it's almost like a disqualifier when, so let's play a hypothetical.
We'll see with expansion now if any of those 2-loss teams get in, if they beat any of those teams. Like that might open up the eyes then if they get those wins in those playoff games.
We're going to have teams with 3 losses in the playoff. Like
100% when you get to 12, you're going to have to.
It's not just going to be 1 or 2. You're going to have 3 or 4 teams with 3 losses in the playoff. It's like, what have we done to the regular season? We have literally sacrificed it, which, hey, again, no one asked me, and I'm not going down that road on this one because we don't have the time. But when hypothetical world here, Mike, let's use Notre Dame because they are not in a conference. So it's at least somewhat feasible for them to do. It's not likely or realistic, but it is within the realm of possibility that they could do this if they wanted to. Let's say Notre Dame put together a schedule in which they played, and argue with me on the teams if you want. It doesn't matter.
Right.
For the point of this conversation, use my power ratings. If they put together a schedule in which they played power rated number 1 Ohio State, power rated number 2 Oklahoma, power rated number 3 Penn State, power rated number 4 Alabama, Oregon number 5, Texas number 6, Georgia number 7, Michigan number 8, Florida State number 9, Washington number 10, they are number 11, USC number 12, and Ole Miss number 13. If they played a schedule in which they played the top 12 non-Notre Dame power-rated teams, and let's just say they played them all at home because that's the only way they could make this thing happen. They played every single one of them at home. Okay, great. So you're getting the home field advantage in each of those games. You've still played the 12 most difficult opponents that you could possibly play. Let's say they went 10-2. That resume 100% deserves to be in the top 4. It would probably be, depending on who the 2 teams they lost to and what they ended up doing, if they both go undefeated against, other good schedules. Okay. It's probably the number 3 best resume at worst because you are 10-2 against the top 12 teams in the entire country.
And compare that to Fresno State.
But the committee would look at that and the committee would say, Notre Dame, you have 2 losses and no conference championship. See,
no conference champ. Yeah,
what?
Right.
What are we doing? So that's why you can't just look at the number in the loss column and immediately throw a team out, or look at the number in the loss column and say, "Oh, 0 losses. They deserve to be in." Not necessarily. Not if it's Miami of Ohio and they played a MAC schedule in their non-conference games or 2 FCSs and a Conference USA and 1 Big Ten. At 12-0, they don't.
Yeah, and that's
a Cincinnati. They did have a resume out of the G5 that deserved to get in, and they were, and that's the way it's supposed to work. So,
and that was the difference of Cincinnati at that point versus UCF. That really is, to simplify it, the reason why UCF didn't get in. They only had, arguably 1, if any, quality wins despite winning all of those games. And it's kind of the simple, you don't have to get in the math to know this or have this part of the conversation. This is kind of common sense for me. It's easier, Kelley, as you would know, it's easier to win all your games if you're playing easier games. It is not rocket science here, to be honest with you. You don't got to spend the time that Kelley Ford's putting that together. Like you're saying about that hypothetical Notre Dame schedule, even really, their schedule is kind of like that. It's not exactly
a difficult schedule.
Yeah, usually it's kind of like that, give or take a few teams having off years. So Notre Dame having a 10-2 season is more difficult to accomplish than going undefeated off Fresno State's schedule this year. That's kind of like that feels like common sense, but for some reason we still get into that mess and we still end up having these debates. But that's kind of where I wanted to go when you bring up that situation there of that hypothetical schedule, because I feel like a lot of this does exist in the back half of the top 25 in terms of the actual top 25. Yes. Like, for example, Fresno State, they're rolling, but the only Power 5 team they're going to play the entire season was week 1 in Purdue, who's not really been, anything of note. They've kind of been exposed. Last year, they did get it in the Big Ten title game, but we talked about that was taking care of, advantage of a division. Now it doesn't look like it's going to be the case for them. They're having a rough go. That's the only Power 5 win. We can argue about quality wins all day with the rest of these games, but that schedule is easier to run through than, say, West Virginia's schedule or maybe even Louisville's schedule. But in the back half of the top 25, I was kind of surprised, and this is what I teased at the beginning of the show. As much as I will argue that West Virginia going 4-1 off their schedule was more difficult to do than, say, Louisville or Maryland both being 5-0 off theirs, I was kind of surprised Maryland got left out of the top 25. They just put a lot of points on the board. They are undefeated. They are in a major conference. Now we're going to see what they really are when they play Ohio State. But was that at all surprising to you? And then how would you have this back half 25 work, and how did it work? Because Maryland seems like the quintessential, the schedule's not tough, but they're undefeated in their major conference and we know them, so we're going to put them there. But it still didn't bump them in. And I guess maybe that's because Louisville got in instead of them, maybe because they're another Power 5 that has the similar spread, but they beat a winning record Power 5 in North Carolina State. But then Fresno got in. Like, what do you think held West Virginia back? Were you at all surprised that Maryland didn't get in there? Like, how did that all shake out for you when you were looking at what the committee or what the coaches poll did, what the Associated Press did, even tea leaves of the committee, and then your back half of the 25? Because that's where it's totally different. Like, that is where there is a catastrophic change. Whereas the top 10, a lot of the teams are similar as we get towards the middle of the season. And you mentioned your top 4 has been the exact same, even in order. But that back half of the top 25 has rarely ever been the same.
Yeah, the margins get thinner the deeper you go into any power rating or resume ranking. Like, the difference between the number 1 and number 5 team and a power rating and a ranking standpoint most times is much, much greater than the difference between 5 to 10 or than the difference from 21 to 25. And so the farther back you go, the more thin the margins, the hairs get thinner, whatever, you're splitting, like all those
you
things.
Are.
But
Right,
for let's just do number 15 to 25 for me. I have West Virginia 15, Miami number 16, Michigan's number 17 in the most deserving ranking for me. They're number 2 in the AP poll. In terms of what they've done on the field this year, I have them number 17.
Where is
it? Yep. Utah is 18. Here's Louisville. I got Louisville 19, so actually higher than the AP does. Okay. USC for me is number 20. Duke's 21. Texas A&M 22. Kentucky 23. Here's Maryland at number 24. The AP has them at 26, so I'm not going to argue that too much. And I have Fresno State at 25. So you mentioned them as a team that snuck in. I'd actually have them ranked one spot below the AP. Here's some teams, though, that the AP has ranked that I don't. Oregon State's number 15 in the AP poll. I have them number 29. Tennessee's number 22 in the AP poll. I have them number 32 in the most deserving. LSU's 23 in the AP. I have them 27. That's not too much of a difference. It just crosses 25, which
got to figure the Volunteers is a lot off last year too.
Definitely. When you start high in a preseason AP poll and you lose only 1-2 games, even if it's against bad competition, you don't fall very far. And we've seen that. So how do the AP poll voters do it? How does the committee do it? Hey, I'm not in those rooms. I'm not casting those votes. Sure. I'm just speculating like anybody else. But with regards to the process through which we could go to do this, we could really we make it more uniform. We could streamline it. We could make it so that everyone's playing by the same rules and there's set criteria as to if you accomplish these things, you will be ranked in this order. Whereas right now it's kind of like you said, they're undefeated. They only have 1 loss from a Power 5. They haven't beaten any top 25 teams yet. They don't have any bad losses yet. Like, everyone's doing something different. Everyone's defining their inputs differently, which again, we're all humans. I'm not saying that my approach is the 100% foolproof. We have to be doing it, but at least it's consistent for every team. Whereas you get other places where it's like, well, for this team, I value this, but for that team, I value that. And then for this team, I kind of value somewhere in between those two. It's like, well, Why? How are you picking and choosing what's important to one team but not another, and then what's important to that team and not this? It doesn't make any sense. So again, I apply my formula, which is rooted, the engine is rooted in the power ratings. I apply that consistently across all 133 teams. That's how I get a most deserving ranking 1 through 133. You can find them all on the website, post them on Twitter or on X. Every Monday as well is when I update those. So yeah, that's how I do it. I can't speak to how the AP poll voters do it. It's clearly different than me. And again, why is Michigan number 2? Well, because they went to the playoff each of the last 2 years and they haven't lost a game yet. Okay, I understand that, but what have they accomplished this year? Why is USC number 9? Well, because they were, top 10 coming into the year and they haven't lost yet. Okay, but those are just a couple teams. Tennessee, why are they even ranked in the top 25? Well, they had a great year last year and they have one loss. Like, okay, but this year, we're ranking on this year, and that's where I get most off with the AP is they're using their preseason, which again, those were based on last year, not this year. If we're truly trying to rank teams on 2023, we cannot be ranking that. We cannot be having, you started the year number 1. Now you're just there because you haven't lost. Like,
and I think there's also a lot of, well, obviously this is all opinion based, but there are a lot of opinions that creep in that maybe are not just off evaluation, certainly not of this year. And what I mean by that is this even goes when you're talking about players getting elected to Hall of Fames and votes there, because I've had flat out media members that are long tenure that actually do respect a journalist, and I won't name any names here, but admit to me when we're debating TO or something, he had to wait 3 years with all the numbers. I say, yeah, I made him wait. He wasn't nice. It's like, what are we doing here? So like, so you get a little bit of that even with this, I feel like, because there's going to be people, and this is even said on national shows, that are going to say, well, if Georgia's undefeated, I don't care who they played and if there's a quality win there. I want them to defend back-to-back national titles. Like, I can't have them not be a 3-time in a row because they're not in the playoff at all. Whereas I'm sure you'd be comfortable with that. You'd be like, well, if the resume doesn't stack up, that's fine. I'm sorry you didn't get in. And then there's also going to be, you mentioned LSU, a 2-loss LSU team out of the SEC that's going to have Paul Feinbaum and others be their mouthpiece on national shows. They're actually going to get respect to still creep up, even though it's 2 losses, because you're talking about how the committee says, well, 2 losses, you're done. Maybe not if you're an SEC team, because they kind of like those teams. But if, for example, West Virginia would lose another game, they would never even sniff the top 25 probably. Whether that's fair or not, there are teams that get bumps. There are other teams that don't get bumps. There are teams that they want in there because a fan base is going to bring in ratings, whereas others maybe would not. I mean, all of that comes into play, whether they admit it or not, in these rankings for the College Football Playoff Committee. And some maybe admit it behind closed doors, wouldn't admit it publicly, but all of it goes in. Like, I'm telling you it's there. And you're not doing that, of course.
Trying not to. That's for darn sure. Trying to rank teams on what they've accomplished. And I'm looking at West Virginia's schedule quickly, because you said if they lose another game, there's only 2 games left in the rest of this year that my numbers make West Virginia a projected underdog.
Yeah, and then West Virginia's schedule, preseason PFF had it as the 3rd toughest schedule. I believe now they shifted it to like the 30th toughest because, as you know, a lot of Big 12 teams lost out of conference. Yeah. So the schedule's not said to be as brutal as it was before. And I actually did see you cited the ESPN FBI. That's kind of the closest thing maybe to what you're doing. They actually do have West Virginia, I believe, favored in all but 2 or 3 of the games, and they believe they have the Mountaineers going 8-4 now, which before the year, I think they have
most likely.
Yeah, so that before the year they had them with like a floor of 1 win, a ceiling of 3, and then now they got them 8-4. So I mean, things quickly change, obviously, when you do see a body of work. But if that's the closest to what you're doing that's been out there forever, with maybe less math involved, they are getting kind of similar results at the end of the year. But yeah, I mean, that is interesting.
Yeah, preseason I projected 4.8 average wins, anywhere between 4 and 6.
And they were 4.5 was the Vegas odds.
Yeah, 4 and 6 was most likely. Now I'm projecting 7.7 average wins, 8-4 most likely, anywhere between 7 and 9, looking like realistic outcomes here. So hey, you saying 4.5 was the Vegas odds? I would have told you to take that over, and you'd be 1 game away from cashing it already. And you've got a lot of opportunities left.
You tell us take that over on the 4.6 just barely, and they're hoping to blow that out of the water. But at least your rankings also allow some room for, as we see in the NFL all the time, a team will go from worst to win the Super Bowl. We've seen it time and time again over the years. and it feels like in the other rankings, you can only go so far. Like if you're supposed to be 1-11 and you do a West Virginia thing, or maybe they finish 8-4, like like they're gonna say like we just can't do it. Whereas you're leaving room to have a special year. Although in all fairness, TCU did go from 5-7 to the playoffs, so they kind of did that. But that bucked the trend and required a lot of upsets and other teams helping them out, whether that's fair or not, to get them in. But they did get there. But it is interesting because a lot of your rankings overall, of course, are different, and it's a different mindset, and you're putting a lot more work into it maybe to get there. But at the end of the day, some of it's the same and some of it's still close. So it's almost like they're falling ass backwards almost into some things being right, even if they're not trying to get there the right way.
No doubt. No doubt. Yep,
Yeah,
I'm with you.
Yeah, so that's just the interesting thing to me there. And I guess lastly, again, talking with Kelley Ford here of K Ford Ratings, thelines.com, joining me here on Mic Drop with Believe and everywhere you get your podcasts. And we definitely got to do this again sometime because a lot more we can discuss, and a lot of these rankings are going to shift and change. And this is all fluid. This is one thing that I think everybody can agree on that I try to get fans to get, because fans will complain all day when at the end of the day, being ranked 25th right now versus being ranked 26th, it's really not that big of a deal. Like if you're not going to be a playoff team, your bowl, whether this is fair or not, it's a different debate too, but your bowl got tie-ins, like your conference has tie-ins, like you're not, it's not going to do anything for you to say, well, we're 25th, they're 26th, we should be in a better bowl game. That's not how it works, unfortunately, once we get to those bowl games. So it really, really doesn't matter. But you will have fans, they're going to get disrespected all season long if they don't get those rankings. They'd rather be 25 than be left out at 26. But in terms of what's coming up here, how much for you do you factor in bye weeks? And the reason why I ask you this is every team across our network actually going to Pitt, even though they're not really in it this year because they're having a real down year, Penn State and West Virginia, they're all on a bye week at the same time. Kind of nice for me. I kind of got kind of a weekend off for the family. Very rare in this market to have them all in the same bye week. But Maryland, for example, is going to be playing a behemoth opponent. That's a big test. And if they win that game, they're going to definitely get ranked and maybe even in the top 20 for coaches and AP and all that. And they really upset the apple cart with a chance at Ohio State coming up. You mentioned the Red River rivalry, and that's a big game. And you lose that, and maybe you're bumped down. You win that, you're really going to earn a quality ranking and a quality win, whether it be you or any of the committees out there. But if, say, you have a team score a big win, but the other team that they're fighting for that 25th spot, for example, is on a bye. Like, will you unfortunately have to penalize West Virginia for them not playing? Or can that be a bump for you that they're not playing? Because the committee sometimes actually serves as a benefit to teams because they can't lose. Like, how does a bye week work for you? Because now we're getting into them. Teams are having them. But if you're doing rankings week to week, you're looking at quality wins, you're going off your preseason ratings that are more legit. But a bye has to kind of make it a little bit more difficult, I'd imagine, because you can't evaluate both teams that are vying for a ranking if one team's off.
So here's a good example. So in a bye week or an off week, you don't add to your resume because you didn't play any games. That doesn't mean your resume can't change though, because your previous opponents that you've played and are on your resume, their power ratings are changing because if they're playing or even if they're not, power ratings are all relative to FBS average. So as long as a team is playing, your power rating is likely to change because the relative distance you are from FBS average, which is a moving target, has changed. So here's it's a concrete example from this past weekend. Going in to week 5, I had North Carolina most deserving resume ranked number 6 in the country. Washington State was most deserving ranked 9th in the country. Neither one of those teams played in week 5, yet coming out of week 5, now going into week 6, I have Washington State most deserving ranked 8, so they're up 1 spot. North Carolina most deserving ranked 9. They're down 3 spots. So neither one of those two teams played. They both moved in the rankings, and one of them actually passed the other. Kelley, how does that happen? Because neither one of them played. Their resumes changed.
Yeah, like North Carolina's last win, against Pitt, who's not that good, and then they're off. Yeah.
The opponents that North Carolina has played to date, they performed worse than the opponents that Washington State has played to date. And as those opponents change, the difficulty to achieve these levels, or the difficulty to achieve the schedules or the records that they have has changed. And the relative scoring margin that would be expected in those games they played has potentially changed as well. So just because you don't play, that doesn't mean your ranking can't change or your resume can't change. It can, it will. but you're not like explicitly adding to your resume. So you're not going to get an opportunity to put another quote quality by opponent's power rating win on your resume. At the same time, you're not putting yourself at risk for picking up a potentially damaging loss. And I say potentially because Ole Miss lost to Alabama. Well, guess what?
Right.
Alabama's a really good team. And so Ole Miss is still
Right.
ranked number 6 right now. Even though Alabama's lost at game 2 in the power rating world, they're a really good team. That's different than, for example, as I try to find a team who lost a game that they shouldn't have, that only has one
Utah,
loss.
I believe, lost.
So Utah, and they're still ranked because they had a really, I mean, they played Florida, who at the time was a good team and all that. But I'm thinking like who's been really punished for losing a game that they weren't supposed to lose, or that was like Kansas State. They lost to who Kansas State lose to this year? They lost to Missouri. So Missouri is not a great power rated team. They're still pretty good and they're undefeated. But when they lost to Missouri, their most deserving rank fell from number 26 to number 43. It's not a game I was expecting Kansas State to lose. So
TCU's been getting killed all year when they lose. I mean, they're losing to 2 teams that I guess would be quality losses, but they're 3-2 and they're not sniffing now.
Yeah,
so the loss to West Virginia. That's
TCU,
considered a bad loss, but you have West Virginia at 15, so that really wouldn't be as bad of a loss for you.
Well, remember, I have West Virginia at 15 in the rankings.
Now in the rankings.
I have West Virginia at 41 now in the power ratings.
Okay.
So TCU is getting punished for losing to a West Virginia team that the numbers see as number 41. I will say that was my super dog underdog pick of the week in a competition that I do for them to win outright. So go Mountaineers. You got me on the board on that one. 13.5 points. Thanks very much. But TCU's most deserving ranking by losing this week fell from number 48 to number 55. So again, when you get that far down, the margins get thinner or slimmer. But anyway, that's how you deal with an off week. Your resume can still change, your ranking can still change, but you're not going to be adding a bulk game to it, right? Because in any given week, you're going to be adding. So like right now for West Virginia, as they move in, so they're going to have this off week. When they come back, the Houston game is going to be worth 1/6 of their resume because it'll be one of the 6 games that they played. Whereas right now, the TCU game is worth 1/5. So that win against TCU will lose a little bit of value in terms of the overall quality because every single game that they played loses value as you add in what the Houston result is, which right now my numbers make West Virginia a 5.5 point favorite, 65% win expectancy for the Mountaineers on the road at Houston.
Yeah, and oddly enough, as someone who covers West Virginia, I have a weird feeling about that game. That might be an interesting bet there because Dana Holgorsen might throw the kitchen sink and throw it 60 times just because he wants to win it, even though his season's going nowhere. Who knows? But yeah, that'll be interesting because it also will be interesting. I have to imagine the reason why Neil Brown even admitted that their disappointment for them not to be ranked this week. You're talking about a bye coming up, playing Houston, then Oklahoma State, I believe. Like Oklahoma State's down despite historically they're normally good. It doesn't feel like there's a path for West Virginia to get in the Associated Press's ranking, even with these being wins, because they're not going to be looked upon as quality wins, as we were bringing up earlier. So you have them right now where they're in a solid spot, and maybe you'll be able to have them stabilize, but the committee's probably not going to love those games because they're going to say that they're not quality wins. That's the issue. But it almost feels like, to simplify too, the reason why you have West Virginia ranked higher than Louisville, than Maryland, than those teams. And they're certainly in that ball of wax with Maryland, Louisville, Fresno, West Virginia. They're kind of probably dogging it out here for that bottom of the later end of the top 25 to being outside the top 25. That's the debate for a lot of people. Those teams, it ends up, I believe, Fresno 25th on the AP, and then, or maybe Louisville, but those two get in, and West Virginia and Maryland do not. And I'd imagine simplified, that part of that is for you. Yeah, those teams, some of those teams are 5-0. Louisville, Maryland, and Fresno, they're all 5-0. West Virginia's 4-1, but you're not really dinging them for that loss to Penn State on the road because Penn State for you is basically a playoff team. So like you probably would assume, and I'm sure what you're going to say is, and we'll see at least with Maryland coming up on the season, that if Louisville, Maryland, or Fresno went to Penn State in that week 1 matchup, they would have lost 2. Is basically what you're giving me. And they didn't, so they're 5-0. But West Virginia did. It's just that's a schedule snafu that ends up with the team being 4-1. So that's probably how we get there. It will be interesting though on how it all gets factored in because I'd imagine there's some head-to-head that'll impact as we go through the season. You're gonna have some head-to-head figuring. So like a Maryland West Virginia back 25 debate right now. When Maryland plays Penn State, if they actually beat him or have a close game, that kind of maybe will ruin the West Virginia debate a little bit. like that. We will see teams play head to head. Do you care about that at all? I'd imagine that has to be part of it when you see head to head matchups.
Yeah, so I even tweeted this
Like
out
sharing
today.
opponents, common
Yeah,
opponents, I guess is
yeah,
better
I
terminology.
tweeted this out today. So common opponents head to head, you got to be careful with that because,
Okay.
eh, again, from a math perspective, right now I have Ole Miss power rated ahead, or sorry, most deserving ranked ahead of Alabama. They lost that game to head to head. I have Utah ranked
Okay.
ahead of Oregon
Sure.
State. They lost that game to head. Those teams are not right next to each other in the rankings. If they were ranked number 10 and number 11, for example, Ole Miss, Alabama, sure, you want to flop those two, go for it. I won't complain because of the head to head. I'll honor that. But right now, when I have Ole Miss at 6 and Alabama at 11, what are you going to do? You're going to drop Ole Miss from 6 to 12 just to put them behind Alabama? Or are you going to move Alabama from 11 to 5 just to get them ahead of Ole
They
Miss?
might. I mean, they might.
Well,
Like, don't
but
they may.
but from a process standpoint, you can't do
Yeah.
that because teams
Right.
6 through 10, now you're either punishing or rewarding them unjustly. So if they end up right next to each other
Yeah.
and you want to do that, sure. And then okay, once you start going into common opponents, all right, now your web's getting too deep. And this whole transitive property of, well, team A beat team B, team B beat team C, but team C beat team A. Okay, well, okay, so now what? Now you got 1-1 and 1-1. Like, what are we doing? How are you gonna? So that's why
You know what we get when we have that, though, Kelley?
controversy and debate.
Well, not only that, but you get UCF claiming a national title.
Well,
That's exactly why they claimed it, is because they beat Auburn, who beat Alabama that year, even though Bama had a tougher schedule and etc. That is their argument, that they had a common opponent and they won the common opponent.
See, that's a slippery slope. It's one I don't subscribe to. It's one I can debunk pretty quickly if given time. But I know we've been going for a while.
I don't want to keep you any longer either. I guess what I do want to get from you, though, before we go here, and we'll wrap up the show. Just because this is something that has always been in my craw, and maybe I'm going to get there this year in a road matchup, and their fan base hates me because I've been bringing this up and putting the asterisk up there. Do you give UCF that claim in 2017, or do you not give them the claim?
No, and I laugh at people.
I mean, it's on the press box. Like, this isn't even just a debated claim. Like they had a parade. Like
I understand what they've done. They should be very happy. And
marketability, they did a great job. Like we're talking about it here.
They should celebrate their achievements and their accomplishments. If they want to call themselves national champions, by all means, go for it. No, I do not recognize them as a national champion in 2017. And I think the Kali Matrix did or something like that.
There was one. Yeah,
that's why they're rating. That's why they're claiming it. Again, put whatever you want up. Doesn't bother me. Doesn't hurt me. Doesn't affect me. No, I do not recognize that. I find it somewhat humorous. And
it is. Yeah.
No, I don't.
It is. It is very, very humorous because I basically the argument that I love and they have no argument for back is, if you claim that as a national title, what's the motive? Outside of money, you shouldn't even join the Big 12. Like, you're better off just clipping off Cupcake City, winning all those games, and claiming national titles left and right.
It's a good point.
Yeah, there was like, why are you jumping at the chance to join the West Virginia schedule that's much harder if you can claim national titles from before? Like, you're worse off, or you could do the Princeton thing and claim national titles when you were 1-0. But yeah, like that is an entire thing that I was liking the conversation. I was liking what you were selling me. If you were going to give UCF the title, I was going to maybe be upset. So I'm glad you didn't go there. But yeah, I mean, it is not just a debate on social media. I'm sure you've seen. I mean, it is on the press, like underneath the press, like it is big lettering. Like there's no other years there. Obviously, that's the only one, and it is outrageously in your face. And it is fake. And I will say this too, even Wikipedia, as insane as they are sometimes, and you can even edit it right now, we could fix Wikipedia if we want to. You mentioned the Colley ranking, or the one that gave them the 1, or at least a share. I believe they have them shared in 1A and 1B with Alabama that year. It even says on Wikipedia, this is not a ranking that anyone has previously deemed legitimate, and is incredibly controversial, and every other past ranking of this one has never been claimed before. But UCF saw it, got excited, and they made some marketing dollars off of it for sure. But
more power to them is what I say.
Yeah, I guess so. But again, Kelley, I definitely appreciate the time. This was, it was longer than we wanted, but I'm happy we did this because I had some fun talking to you. That's probably how we got this show to be what it was. Kelley Ford again, kfordratings.com, thelines.com. I'll plug them again for you. And have a good night, man. We'll definitely have to do this again sometime.
I appreciate it, Mike. Anytime, always happy to come on, talk ratings, rankings, West Virginia, Penn State, Pitt, whoever. Yeah, college football is awesome. I love it. And it's fun talking with people who love it as much as I do, like yourself. So appreciate it. And hopefully everyone enjoyed that.
Absolutely. Again, Kelley Ford from K4ratings.com and thelines.com. And that was a fun conversation for sure. Honestly, and that's an example, I'll be quite honest with you, where followed him on social media for a while, followed me back on social media for a while. We've talked off and on, whether it be on social media or, some private messages to say, hey, this is my opinion here. Would you come on this show? Would you do this? And having some conversation, just media colleague networking connections. The first time we did anything together, didn't really know what I was going to get. And we end up with a great conversation. So I love that. And I'm happy that I was able to talk Kelley Ford there to get his take and how he comes up with his rankings. Because I'm sure you see him on Twitter. They catch fire. They go viral when they're there. And he puts more work than anyone's putting on the committee. I'm comfortable saying, and I know some who have votes. Like, I don't think you're putting in the energy that Kelley Ford's putting together. Maybe you could argue it's too much energy because I guess it doesn't really matter. But it's fun, and I love debating and having these conversations because I do think I don't agree with everything he has up there, but no one's ever going to agree with anybody's rankings or ratings or whatever you want to call them. But it's much closer to probably what's reality. Like, I don't think I'd have West Virginia 15. That seems like a lot. I covered the program. I'd squeeze them in the top 25. I wrote about it. 15 seems like we're getting really nuts in terms of at least who's best and what they would do. I mean, their wins have been ugly, to be honest, even though the resume is 4-1 with the quality loss and the Power 5 wins and maybe a quality win or two, etc., that maybe others don't have. But 15 seems like a lot. But we're not even arguing back 25 with Kelley when it comes to the Mountaineers. He has them at 15. So Mountaineer fans, I don't even think are even comfortable with that ranking right now. And I think West Virginia, too, likes kind of being the underdog. So maybe Kelley wouldn't have him be that underdog. I think they like being able to say, hey, everyone thought we're 14. Everyone doubted us. Everyone ranked us here. Everyone wouldn't rank us there. And Kelley says, no, I will. I'll put you there. I'll rank you there. But they're like, we don't want that because we want to. Or Neil Brown saying, I want to have the pregame speech, Kelley. I want the pregame speech. Leave me outside. I think he secretly prefers the pregame speech. But again, Kelley Ford of K4ratings.com, at K4ratings on social, and thelines.com, making his appearance possible to us. Again, you can find Mic Drop. Every episode of Mic Drop is available throughout the Believe Network platform. Also, where you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, etc. Even a Mic Drop page there on Believe site. And you can also find me on social media at MikeAsti11. And that is the same Twitter, X, Instagram, wherever you want to find me. To have more of these conversations, try to keep it sane, but more of these conversations. And as we get more into the season, more body of work, more resume, good, bad, or ugly, quality wins, even if you want to go to what the committee has in the AP of ranked wins and see those rankings versus Kelley's, we're going to get more data points as we get more towards the heartbeat of the season, and then certainly into those pesky conference championship games and who's playing in those and how much they're going to matter. And they're going to matter a lot, even though Kelley would not want them to matter. So appreciate the time again from Kelley Ford. It was a great conversation. Happy to do this and keep it here. Download, subscribe to this, every episode of Mic Drop throughout Believe, and enjoy the games ahead. Enjoy the rest of the season, no matter what opinion you may share, and let the debates rage on.